You might want to take a closer look at that badge before you laugh, she said quietly, but he was already smiling. The sound of it carried across the polished marble lobby, sharp and dismissive, the kind of laugh that didn't just fill a room. It claimed it. Daniel Whitmore stood near the security desk, one hand in his tailored coat pocket, the other loosely holding his phone, his reflection stretching clean and confident across the glass wall behind him. Around him, people slowed without meaning to, conversations thinning into silence as his voice cut through the space like it always did, controlled, practiced, certain. Ava Carter didn't move. She stood just inside the entrance, the cold air from outside still clinging faintly to her coat, her posture straight, her expression unreadable. The small gold badge in her hand caught the overhead light, just enough to glint, not enough to impress. FBI, Daniel repeated, glancing at it like it was a novelty item, something bought at a gift shop on the way in. That's interesting. His lips curled, not quite a smile, not quite a sneer, something in between that suggested he had already decided how this interaction would end. A security guard shifted beside the desk, uncertain, his fingers hovering near his radio but not touching it. Ava's eyes flicked once, briefly, to the guard, then back to Daniel. Calm, steady, measured. Mr. Whitmore, she said, her voice even, carrying just enough to reach him without rising above the quiet tension forming in the room. I need you to remain here for a few minutes. There was no force in her tone, no urgency, just a statement, simple and direct. That, more than anything, seemed to amuse him. Daniel let out a soft breath through his nose, shaking his head slightly, as if indulging a harmless misunderstanding. You need me to stay? He echoed, tilting his head, studying her now with a kind of curiosity reserved for things that didn't quite belong. Do you have any idea who I am? The question hung there, heavy but expected. No one answered. The receptionist lowered her gaze. A man near the elevators pretended to check his watch. The air felt thinner, like something invisible had shifted its weight. Ava didn't respond immediately. Instead, she adjusted her grip on the badge, the edge of the metal pressing lightly into her palm, grounding, familiar. Her heartbeat stayed slow, deliberate, each breath measured against the rhythm she had learned to trust. Yes, she said finally. One word, nothing more. Daniel's smile widened just a fraction, encouraged, misreading the stillness as hesitation, as doubt. Then you also know, he continued, stepping closer, his shoes clicking softly against the floor, that whatever this is, this little misunderstanding, you're making a mistake. He gestured vaguely toward the badge, dismissive. People don't just walk in here and stop me from doing my job. Somewhere behind him, a monitor flickered for half a second before stabilizing, the light shifting so subtly most wouldn't notice. Ava did. Her gaze didn't follow it. She stayed focused on him, her expression unchanged, her stance unbroken. Sir, she said again, just as calm, just as controlled. I'm going to need you to stay. This time, the words landed differently. Not louder, not sharper, but heavier, like they carried something beneath them that hadn't been revealed yet. Daniel paused, just for a fraction of a second, something unreadable crossing his face before it disappeared beneath the same confident mask. Then he laughed again, softer this time, almost amused by his own patience. No, he said simply. And that was when the room seemed to hold its breath. Daniel's answer did not echo the way his voice usually did. It seemed to stop short, caught somewhere between the polished floors and the tightening air, and for the first time since he had stepped into the lobby, something did not move on his command, not the guard, not the receptionist, not even the quiet hum of conversation that had already faded into nothing. It was as if the building itself had paused to listen, and Ava noticed it, not with her eyes, but with something deeper, the same instinct that had guided her through rooms like this before, rooms where power spoke loudly until it suddenly did not. She let a single second pass, then another, not rushing, not reacting, just allowing the silence to settle heavier around him. I understand that you are used to saying no, she said, her voice steady, almost soft, but clear enough to reach him without effort. But today is not one of those days. Daniel exhaled slowly through his nose, the faintest crease forming between his brows before it disappeared, replaced by a sharper version of the same confidence he wore like a second suit. You are out of your depth, he replied, his tone lower now, controlled, the kind of voice meant to close conversations rather than continue them. He took a step to the side as if to move past her, already dismissing her presence entirely. But Ava shifted just enough to remain in his line of path, not blocking, not touching, simply existing in a way that made it impossible to ignore her. The guard's radio crackled faintly, a burst of static that came and went too quickly to understand. The guard glanced down at it, confused, then back up again, unsure whether to intervene or stay still. Daniel noticed the hesitation and let out a quiet, humorless laugh. "This is exactly the problem," he said, gesturing lightly around them. "People see a badge and forget how things actually work." He leaned slightly closer, not enough to invade her space, but enough to lower his voice so that only she and the immediate few could hear. "You think that gives you authority in here?" His eyes flicked briefly to the badge in her hand, then back to her face, measuring, dismissing. "It does not." Ava held his gaze without blinking, without shifting, her breathing even, her shoulders relaxed. There was no reaction in her expression, no flicker of offense, no rise in tension, just stillness, deliberate and controlled. "Authority does not come from what you believe," she said. "It comes from what is already in motion." Daniel tilted his head slightly, the words registering but not landing. "Not yet." Behind him, one of the wall-mounted screens dimmed for a fraction of a second before returning to normal, the change so subtle it might have been missed. But the receptionist looked up, her fingers pausing mid-keystroke. The system lagged again, just a breath, then corrected. Daniel's phone buzzed in his hand, a short vibration that he ignored at first, continuing to hold Ava's gaze. Unwilling to break the moment on anything that felt insignificant, the phone buzzed again, longer this time, and he glanced down briefly, irritation flickering across his face. A message preview lit the screen. He did not open it. He did not need to. But something in the sender line made his jaw tighten just slightly. Barely noticeable unless you were looking for it. Ava saw it. She saw everything, not as pieces, but as a pattern slowly revealing itself. "You should check that," she said quietly, not as a suggestion, not as a command, just a statement placed exactly where it needed to be. Daniel looked back up at her, a fraction of a second too slow. "I will handle my business," he replied, sharper now, the edge returning, but not as clean as before, not as effortless. Another vibration, this time followed by a faint notification sound from somewhere behind the desk, then another, a different tone, from a different device. The guard shifted again, his hand finally touching the radio clipped to his shoulder, but he did not speak into it. He just listened, his posture changing in a way that was almost imperceptible, like someone who had just realized the rules had shifted but had not yet been told how. The lights overhead seemed colder now, or maybe it was the way they reflected off the marble, sharper, less forgiving. Daniel's phone buzzed again, and this time he opened it, just a glance, quick, controlled. But it was enough. The color in his expression changed, not dramatically, not enough for anyone across the room to notice, but enough for Ava. His thumb hovered over the screen, scrolling once, then stopping. The silence around them deepened. No one moved. No one spoke. Even the distant elevator chimes seemed muted, like it had been pushed further away. "What is this?" Daniel muttered, not fully to her, not fully to himself, more like a question that had slipped out. Before he could contain it, Ava did not answer immediately. She let the moment breathe, let the weight of his own uncertainty settle into place. Then she spoke, her voice just as calm as before. "It is the part where things stop responding to you," she said. And for the first time since he had laughed, Daniel Whitmore did not interrupt. The words did not rush out of him the way they usually did. They lingered, unfinished, as if even his voice was waiting for confirmation from something outside his control. Daniel's eyes stayed locked on the screen in his hand, scanning once. Then again, slower this time, his thumb hovering but no longer confident enough to move with certainty. The glow from the phone reflected faintly against his face, sharpening the lines that had not been there a minute ago. Behind him, another device chimed. Then another, not loud, not chaotic, just consistent enough to feel intentional, like a rhythm forming beneath the silence. The receptionist shifted in her chair, her monitor now frozen on a login screen she had not seen before. Her fingers tapped a key, then another, but nothing responded. She looked up instinctively, not at Daniel, but at Ava, as if something in the room had already decided where authority had shifted. Ava did not acknowledge her. Her attention remained steady, centered, patient. She had seen this moment before, the exact second when certainty began to fracture, not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly, internally, where it mattered most. "You should read it carefully," she said, her voice calm, almost neutral, but placed with precision. Daniel swallowed, a small, controlled motion, and for the first time since he had spoken, he did not respond immediately. He turned slightly, angling his body away from her, as if that could create distance from what was unfolding. His eyes moved across the message again, then down, then back up, searching for something that would restore the order he understood. But the longer he looked, the less familiar it became. "This is not possible," he said under his breath, not loud enough for the room, just enough for the moment. Ava took a slow breath, not reacting, not correcting, just allowing him to arrive at the conclusion on his own terms. The guard's radio crackled again, this time followed by a voice, low, controlled, and unmistakably official. The words were not fully clear, but the tone was. It carried the kind of authority that did not ask permission. The guard straightened instinctively, his hand now firmly gripping the radio, his posture no longer uncertain. Daniel heard it too, his head turning slightly, just enough to register that something beyond this immediate space had shifted, something larger, something coordinated. His phone buzzed again, and this time he answered it without hesitation, bringing it to his ear, his voice lower now, sharper. "What is going on?" he said, listening, his expression tightening with each passing second. The response on the other end was not visible, but it was enough, more than enough. His shoulders, once relaxed and certain, now held a tension that had not been there before. His free hand pressed lightly against his side, fingers curling as if trying to regain control through motion. "No," he said after a pause, firmer now, almost pushing against what he was hearing. "That is not accurate. You need to verify that." Another pause, longer this time, and the silence that followed was heavier than anything spoken. Ava watched him without interruption, without satisfaction, just observation, precise and complete. This was not about reaction. It was about process, and the process was unfolding exactly as it was meant to. Daniel lowered the phone slowly, not fully removing it from his ear at first, as if hoping the voice would continue, as if silence itself might correct what had just been said, but it did not. The line had already gone quiet. He pulled the phone away, staring at it for a moment before letting his arm drop slightly. His eyes lifted, meeting Ava's again, and this time there was something different there. Not fear, not yet, but recognition, the kind that comes when a person realizes they are no longer at the center of the room. "You initiated this," he said, the statement more controlled than the moment justified. As if he was rebuilding his footing one word at a time. Ava did not move, did not nod, did not confirm. "I followed procedure," she replied, and the simplicity of it landed harder than anything else. Behind them, the main glass doors opened with a quiet hydraulic hiss, not rushed, not forced, just precise, and a subtle shift in the air followed, the kind that comes when new presence enters without needing to announce itself. The guard turned toward the entrance immediately, his posture straightening even further, and the receptionist stopped trying to fix her screen altogether, her hands resting still on the desk. Daniel did not turn right away, but he felt it, the change, the weight, the certainty of something final approaching. Ava's gaze flicked briefly past him, just once, then returned, her voice lowering slightly, not for secrecy, but for clarity. "This is the part where you decide how you respond," she said, and for the first time since he had dismissed her, Daniel Whitmore understood that the decision was no longer his to make. Daniel did not turn immediately, but his shoulders tightened as if his body had already acknowledged what his mind was still trying to resist. The faint echo of measured footsteps crossed the polished floor behind him, not hurried, not hesitant, just deliberate, each step landing with quiet authority that did not need volume to be heard, the kind of presence that did not announce itself because it never had to. The guard straightened fully now, hand dropping from the radio to his side, no longer unsure, no longer waiting. The air shifted again, subtle but undeniable, like a current changing direction beneath still water. Daniel finally turned, slow at first, then sharper as his eyes locked onto the figures approaching from the entrance. 2 men and a woman, all in dark suits, their expressions neutral, their pace synchronized, their focus fixed, and in that moment the room seemed to reorganize itself around them, as if everything that had felt uncertain seconds ago had now found its center. Ava did not move. She remained exactly where she had been. The same posture, the same stillness, the same quiet control, but the context around her had changed, and now it was visible. Now it was undeniable. Daniel's gaze flicked from them back to her, then back again, trying to calculate, trying to reframe, trying to regain ground that was no longer there. You brought them here, he said. But the statement lacked the certainty it was meant to carry. It sounded less like an accusation and more like an attempt to understand timing that had already passed him. Ava's voice remained even. They were already on their way, she said, and the distinction landed heavier than any direct answer. The lead agent stepped forward just enough to close the distance, stopping at a respectful but intentional space, not crowding, not imposing, just present. Mr. Whitmore, the agent said, his tone calm, formal, unmistakably official. Daniel straightened instinctively, a reflex he had built over years of controlling rooms like this. But this time the movement felt different, less like dominance and more like defense. I am going to need you to come with us. The agent continued. No raised voice, no dramatics, just a clear statement placed into the air like a fact that had already been decided. Daniel let out a short breath, almost a laugh, but it did not carry. It faded before it fully formed. You are making a mistake, he said, the words familiar, practiced, something he had likely said before in other situations. But here, now, they did not land the same way. The agent did not respond immediately, did not argue, did not engage in the back and forth Daniel seemed to expect. Instead, he simply held the moment, allowing the weight of the situation to settle without interruption. Ava watched from the side, her presence unchanged, but now clearly part of something larger. Daniel glanced at her again, searching for something, a signal, a break, a sign that this could still be redirected. This is not how this works, he added, quieter now, more controlled, but also more uncertain. Ava met his gaze, steady, grounded. This is exactly how it works, she replied, and the clarity in her voice left no space for interpretation. Behind the desk, the receptionist sat completely still, her screen still frozen, her hands resting lightly on the surface as if she had forgotten what she had been doing entirely. The man near the elevators had not moved either, his eyes fixed on the scene, absorbing every detail without making a sound. Daniel's phone buzzed again in his hand, but he did not look at it this time. He did not reach for it. Whatever had been on that screen no longer mattered in the same way. The structure he had relied on had already shifted, and now he could feel it, not in one single moment, but in layers, each second adding weight to something he could not push back against. I need to speak to my counsel, he said finally, the first sentence that carried a trace of recalibration, a step toward procedure rather than control. The lead agent nodded once, not dismissive, not conceding, just acknowledging the request within the boundaries that already existed. You will have that opportunity, he said, but first you are going to come with us. Daniel held his gaze for a moment longer, then looked past him, toward the doors, toward the open space beyond, as if measuring distance that no longer mattered. The silence stretched again, but this time it felt final, not waiting, not building, just settled. Ava took a small step forward, not to lead, not to command, but to close the space that had always been there between them. Mr. Whitmore, she said, her voice low, steady. You can walk out of here with clarity, or you can stand here and let it be decided for you. The words were not threatening, not forceful, just direct, grounded in reality rather than pressure. Daniel exhaled slowly, his shoulders lowering just a fraction, the tension shifting into something quieter, heavier. His eyes moved once more across the room, taking in the stillness, the faces, the absence of control he had once filled without thinking. Then he nodded, small, controlled, but real. Fine, he said, and for the first time since he had laughed, there was no resistance in the word, only acceptance of something he could no longer shape. The word lingered in the air after he said it, softer than expected, almost out of place coming from someone who had built a life on never-yielding ground. And for a brief second no one moved, as if the room itself needed to confirm that the shift had truly happened. Then the lead agent gave a small nod, not approval, not acknowledgement of authority, just recognition that the moment had crossed a line it would not return from. "This way, sir," he said, turning slightly toward the entrance, his hand gesturing with quiet precision. Daniel did not argue, did not question. He simply adjusted his coat with a controlled motion that felt more like habit than intention, his fingers smoothing the fabric along his sleeve, buying himself a second, maybe two, before stepping forward. The sound of his shoes against the marble floor was different now, still sharp, still clean, but lacking the rhythm it had carried before. It no longer echoed with certainty. It followed instead, measured, contained. Ava fell in a step just behind and to the side, not leading, not trailing, positioned exactly where she needed to be, her gaze forward, her posture unchanged, the badge still visible in her hand, catching the overhead light in brief flashes as they moved. The glass doors ahead stood open, the outside air waiting just beyond, cool and still. The contrast to the controlled interior space they were leaving behind. Daniel's eyes flicked once to the reflection in the glass as they approached, his own image staring back at him, composed, intact, almost unchanged, and yet something in the way he held himself did not match the man he had seen minutes earlier. The doors parted fully as they stepped through, the faint hum of the city slipping in, distant traffic, a low breeze, the ordinary world continuing without pause. Two black vehicles were parked at the curb, engines idling quietly, their presence understated but unmistakable. The second agent moved ahead to open the rear door of the nearest car, not rushed, not forceful, just part of a sequence that had already been set in motion long before this moment. Daniel slowed slightly as they reached the curb, his gaze shifting outward, scanning the street, the building across from them, the sky above, as if trying to anchor himself to something familiar, something unchanged. His phone buzzed again in his hand, and this time he looked at it, not with urgency, but with something closer. To distance, the screen lit up with notifications he no longer had time to interpret, messages stacking, calls waiting, the network of control he had relied on continuing to operate without him. He exhaled, slowly, then slipped the phone into his pocket without answering, without responding. The decision simple, final. He turned toward the open car door, pausing just before stepping in, his eyes shifting once more, this time toward Ava, not searching now, not calculating, just looking, really looking for the first time since he had seen her. "You knew," he said quietly, not accusatory, not defensive, just stating something that had finally settled into place. Ava met his gaze, steady, calm, the same expression she had carried from the beginning. "I saw what was already there," she replied, her voice even, without emphasis, without need for explanation. Daniel held that for a second, then nodded once, small, controlled, as if acknowledging not just her words, but everything that had unfolded around them. Then he stepped into the vehicle, lowering himself into the seat with the same composure he had maintained throughout. The door closed with a soft, final sound, not loud, not dramatic, just decisive. The second agent moved around to the opposite side, entering in sync. The lead agent took the front passenger seat, and within seconds the vehicle began to move, pulling away from the curb with smooth precision, merging into the flow of traffic as if it had always been part of it. Ava remained on the sidewalk, her figure still against the backdrop of glass and steel, the building rising behind her, the reflection of the street stretching across its surface. She did not watch the car disappear. She did not turn to follow it. Instead, she stood for a moment longer, the quiet settling back into place around her, the tension that had filled the air dissolving into something lighter, almost invisible. The guard stepped just inside the doorway behind her, his posture no longer rigid, just present. The receptionist inside the lobby finally moved again, her hands returning to the keyboard as her screen flickered back to life. Normalcy returning piece by piece. Ava lowered her hand slightly, the badge no longer held up, just resting naturally at her side, the metal cool against her fingers. She took a slow breath, steady, measured, then turned, stepping back toward the entrance, her reflection catching briefly in the glass. a quiet figure moving through a space that had just shifted in ways most would never fully understand. And yet to her, it had been exactly what it was meant to be, nothing more, nothing less. The lobby did not return to normal all at once. It happened in fragments, like a system rebooting in pieces. First, the faint hum of conversation began to rise again, cautious at first, then steadier, as if people were testing whether it was safe to speak. The receptionist blinked twice at her screen before resuming her typing, slower than before, more aware. The guard shifted his weight, no longer rigid, but not entirely relaxed either, as though the memory of what had just occurred had not fully released its hold. Ava stepped back inside, the glass doors closing softly behind her, sealing off the outside air and returning her to the controlled quiet of the building. But it was not the same quiet. It carried a different texture now, something more observant, more awake. Her footsteps were light against the marble, deliberate but unhurried, each step grounded, measured, the badge in her hand now resting naturally at her side, no longer raised, no longer needed as a statement, just present, like the truth it represented. She moved past the security desk without pause, but the guard straightened slightly as she did, not out of obligation, but out of recognition, a subtle shift that said more than any words could. Ava gave the smallest nod in return, not acknowledgement of status, but of awareness, of shared understanding that something real had passed through this space. Near the elevators, the man who had been watching earlier stepped aside instinctively, giving her room. Without being asked, his eyes followed her for a second longer than necessary, not out of curiosity, but out of respect, as if trying to reconcile the quiet figure in front of him with the force that had just altered the trajectory of someone else's life. Ava pressed the call button, the soft glow illuminating beneath her fingertip. The wait was brief, but in that short span of time the silence around her deepened again. Not tense, not heavy, just still, like the calm that follows a storm that never raised its voice. The elevator doors opened with a smooth, controlled motion, revealing an empty interior, clean lines, mirrored walls, and soft overhead lighting that cast a pale reflection of her figure. She stepped inside, turning slightly as the doors began to close, and for a brief moment her reflection aligned perfectly with the glass outside. Two images overlapping, one inside, one outside, both still, both composed. Then the doors sealed shut, and the outside world disappeared. The elevator began its ascent, quiet and steady, the faint mechanical hum almost imperceptible. Ava's gaze lowered slightly, not in thought, but in awareness. Her breathing remained even, her posture relaxed. There was no visible release, no shift in emotion, just continuity, as if this moment was simply one step in a longer path she had already accepted. The numbers above the door ticked upward, one floor at a time, each soft chime marking progress that did not need urgency. When the elevator stopped, the doors opened onto a quieter floor, one with fewer people, more space, the kind of place where conversations happened behind closed doors rather than in open air. Ava stepped out, her shoes making almost no sound on the carpeted surface. The lighting here was warmer, less reflective, but still precise, still intentional. She moved down the hallway with the same steady pace, passing closed offices, muted voices behind walls, the faint scent of coffee lingering in the air. At the end of the corridor, a door stood slightly ajar, a soft light spilling through the gap. Ava reached it without hesitation, her hand lifting just enough to push it open. Inside, a small conference room waited, a single table, a few chairs, a laptop already open, its screen glowing with lines of data that continued to update in real time. One of the agents who had arrived earlier stood near the window, his posture relaxed but attentive. He turned as she entered, giving a brief nod. "It is all moving forward," he said, his voice low, controlled, the words simple but carrying weight. Ava stepped further into the room, her eyes moving briefly to the screen, scanning, confirming, not searching for validation, just verifying alignment. "Any resistance?" she asked, her tone calm, almost routine. The agent shook his head once. "Not from where it matters," he replied. Ava absorbed that without visible reaction, setting the badge down gently on the table, the soft contact of metal against wood barely audible. She rested her hands lightly at her sides, her gaze steady on the information in front of her. Outside the window, the city stretched on as it always had. Unchanged, unaware, traffic moving, people walking, time continuing without pause, and inside that quiet room, the process that had begun long before this morning continued exactly as it was meant to, precise, measured, and already beyond the point of return. The data on the screen did not rush. It unfolded, line by line, timestamp by timestamp, each update quiet but precise, like a pulse that did not need to be heard to be felt. Ava stood still for a moment longer, her eyes tracking the movement without strain, absorbing patterns rather than individual entries. The room around her remained calm, contained, the low hum of the laptop the only consistent sound. The agent near the window shifted slightly, folding his arms as he watched her read, not interrupting, not explaining, because he knew she did not need it. "They are already flagging the accounts," he said after a second, his tone measured, almost routine. Ava nodded once, her gaze still on the screen. A series of transactions scrolled upward, numbers aligning, discrepancies revealing themselves not through noise, but through repetition. "Cross-border transfers?" she asked, her voice quiet but exact. The agent stepped closer, glancing at the same section. "Multiple channels, routed through shell entities, but the pattern holds," he replied. Ava let that settle, her fingers resting lightly on the edge of the table, not touching the keyboard, not interfering, just present. The badge beside her caught the light again, a faint reflection sliding across the surface of the wood, unnoticed by anyone but her. She exhaled slowly, not in relief, but in confirmation. The process was intact, the structure holding exactly as expected. "And internal compliance?" she asked, her eyes finally lifting from the screen. The agent met her gaze, a slight pause before answering. "Delayed responses, selective reporting, but no full obstruction." Ava held that for a moment, weighing it, not emotionally, but structurally, like pieces in a system aligning or resisting. He knew. The agent added, not as a question, but as a statement drawn from what they had both seen. Ava did not answer immediately, her gaze drifting back to the window for a brief second, the city outside still moving, unchanged, the distance between that motion and the quiet precision inside the room almost impossible to measure. "He understood enough to benefit," she said finally, her voice steady, "but not enough to see where it would end." The agent nodded slightly, accepting that, not as judgment, but as clarity. A soft chime came from the laptop, a new notification appearing at the corner of the screen. Ava leaned forward just enough to read it, her posture still controlled, still composed. "Legal, just confirmed," the agent said, glancing at his own device. "They are moving on the warrants." Ava's eyes remained on the update, the words simple, procedural, but carrying the weight of everything that had led to this point. She reached out then, finally touching the keyboard, not typing, just scrolling once, bringing a specific document into view, her movement precise, intentional. She read through it quickly, not skipping, not hesitating, every line processed with the same calm focus she had carried from the beginning. "There is a gap," she said after a moment, not loud, not urgent, but clear. The agent leaned in slightly. "Where?" he asked. Ava pointed lightly to the screen, a section where the timestamps did not align perfectly, a fraction of delay, a deviation that most would overlook. "Here," she said. "It repeats, but not consistently." The agent studied it, his brow tightening just slightly. "A buffer," he suggested. Ava shook her head once, small, controlled. "No, not a buffer," she replied. "A delay inserted manually." The distinction landed, subtle but critical. The agent exhaled slowly, understanding the implication, without needing it explained further. "So someone else is still active," he said. Ava did not respond right away, her eyes narrowing just slightly, not in tension, but in focus, tracing the pattern again, confirming it from a second angle. "Not someone else," she said finally, her voice quieter now, more precise. "Someone who has not realized the system already shifted." The agent straightened, absorbing that. The room seemed to grow even stiller, the quiet deepening as the scope of the situation expanded just beyond what had been contained. Ava leaned back slightly, her hand leaving the keyboard, returning to her side. the badge on the table reflecting a thin line of light across its surface. "Then we are not finished," the agent said, not as a question, but as recognition. Ava's gaze lifted fully now, meeting his, steady, grounded, unchanged. "We were never finished," she replied, and in that moment, the silence in the room was no longer calm. It was focused, like everything was narrowing towards something that had not yet revealed itself, but was already moving into place. The room did not react loudly to the realization. It tightened instead, like something invisible drawing inward, the kind of tension that did not need raised voices to exist. Ava's eyes remained on the screen for a second longer, tracing the anomaly one more time, as if confirming not just what it was, but what it meant. The repetition was subtle, almost elegant in the way it tried to hide itself, but it was there, consistent enough to reveal intention, inconsistent enough to suggest urgency. She reached for the trackpad again, scrolling back through the timeline, not quickly, not frantically, but with a steady, deliberate pace that mirrored her breathing. The agent beside her watched without interrupting, his attention shifting between the data and her expression, waiting for the moment when observation would turn into direction. "It is narrowing," she said quietly, more to the pattern than to him, her voice low but precise. The agent leaned slightly closer, his eyes following. Where her gaze settled, a cluster of entries, each separated by seconds, not minutes, not hours, seconds, whoever. "This is," he said. "They are still inside the system." Ava nodded once, small, controlled. "And they think they are ahead," she replied, the words carrying no judgment, only clarity. Another notification chimed, softer this time, almost like a whisper against the steady hum of the room. Ava did not look away, her focus locked on the sequence, her mind aligning each piece with what had already been confirmed. "Pull access logs for the last 10 minutes, she said, not raising her voice, but the instruction landed with weight. The agent moved immediately, stepping to the laptop, his fingers moving across the keyboard with practiced efficiency. The screen shifted, new data populating, columns filling with entries that scrolled upward in real time, each line a footprint, each timestamp a marker of presence. Ava watched the pattern form, not searching randomly, but waiting for the moment it revealed itself. The room felt smaller now, not physically, but in focus, like everything unnecessary had been stripped away, leaving only the essential. "There," she said, her voice barely above a breath. "But exact." The agent paused the scroll, freezing the screen at the point she indicated, a single user access point, repeated, but not flagged by the system. "Not yet. That should have been locked," he said, more to himself than to her. Ava's eyes narrowed slightly, not in frustration, but in concentration. "It was," she replied. They reopened it. The distinction landed, and with it came the understanding that this was no automated oversight, no delayed response. It was intentional, immediate, and still active. The agent straightened slightly, his posture shifting from observation to readiness. "We can shut it down now," he said, his hand hovering near the controls. Ava did not answer right away, her gaze still fixed on the screen, the pattern continuing to update, still moving, still alive. "No," she said finally, her voice calm, steady, but firm. The agent hesitated, glancing at her, waiting for the reasoning. Ava leaned forward just slightly, her hand resting near the keyboard without touching it. "If we shut it down now, we lose the path," she said, each word placed carefully. "They disappear, and we are left with fragments." The agent held that for a moment, then nodded slowly, understanding replacing instinct. "So we follow," he said. Ava's gaze did not shift. "We let them lead," she corrected, and the difference changed everything. The room fell quiet again, but this time it was not stillness. It was movement contained, like a current running beneath the surface. The laptop chimed again. Another entry appearing, the same access point, the same pattern, but now with a slight variation, a change in timing, a shift that suggested adjustment. Ava saw it immediately, her posture tightening just a fraction. "They know something is wrong," she said. The agent looked back at the screen, his expression sharpening. "Because of Whitmore," he said. Ava nodded once. "Because the system reacted," she replied, and they felt it. The implication settled between them. The person on the other end was not just present, they were aware, adapting, moving faster. Now, the data reflected it. Entries appearing closer together, the rhythm changing, less controlled, more urgent. Ava straightened slightly, her hand lifting from the table, her eyes finally leaving the screen to meet the agent's. "We do not rush this," she said, her voice low but absolute. "We stay with it." The agent nodded, his stance aligning with hers, no longer reactive, but intentional. "What do you need?" he asked. Ava turned back to the screen, the faint glow reflecting in her eyes. "Steady, focused, unwavering. Time," she said. And in that moment, the quiet room held something sharper than tension. It held precision, the kind that did not break under pressure, but refined itself within it, as the unseen presence on the other side of the system continued to move, unaware that every step it took was no longer leading it away, but drawing it closer. The seconds did not pass the way they normally did. They stretched, not slower, but sharper, each one carrying more weight than the last as the pattern on the screen began to evolve. Ava did not blink as often now, her focus narrowing, not out of strain, but precision, the kind that filtered everything unnecessary until only. Movement remained. The entries continued to stack, each new line appearing just slightly faster than before, not chaotic, not careless, but adjusted, as if the person on the other side had felt the pressure and responded without fully understanding its source. The agent beside her watched the same progression, his breathing steady but his posture more alert now. "They are accelerating," he said quietly. Ava nodded once, her eyes tracking the intervals, the spacing between entries compressing by fractions of a second. "Not just faster," she replied. "More selective." She leaned slightly closer, her finger hovering near the screen, not touching, just marking the shift. "They are dropping noise," she added. The agent followed her indication, noticing it now. Entire branches of activity disappearing, leaving only a cleaner, narrower trail. "They are trying to disappear," he said. Ava shook her head once, small. "Precise? No," she corrected. "They are trying to survive." The distinction settled differently, the intent behind the movement no longer abstract, but human, reactive, aware. The system chimed again, a sharper tone this time, the kind reserved for internal alerts that had crossed a threshold. Ava's gaze flicked to the corner of the screen where a flag appeared, small but unmistakable. "There it is," the agent said, stepping closer. Ava did not respond immediately, her eyes scanning the alert, reading not just the message, but its timing, its placement within the sequence. "They triggered it themselves," she said after a moment, her voice calm, but carrying a deeper certainty now. The agent frowned slightly. "How?" he asked. Ava leaned back just enough to take in the full screen again, the pattern no longer fragmented, but converging. "Because they moved too clean," she replied. "The system expects variation. They removed it." The agent exhaled slowly, understanding the irony. The attempt to hide had created a signature more visible than anything random could have. The entries continued to update, but now they were different, not just faster, but more direct, the path narrowing into a single line of movement that pointed somewhere specific, somewhere deliberate. Ava's eyes followed it without hesitation, her focus absolute. "They are heading for an exit," the agent said. Ava did not look at him. "They think they are," she replied, her voice steady. "But they are already inside a closed loop." The agent paused, absorbing that, the implications settling in layers. The person on the other end was not escaping. They were circling, contained without realizing it. The laptop chimed again, a new alert stacking over the previous one, the system now fully aware, fully engaged. Ava reached for the keyboard again, her fingers resting lightly before pressing a single key. The screen shifted, isolating the active thread, expanding it into view. The data spread out, clearer now, each step visible, each decision exposed. "There," she said, her voice low, almost quiet, but exact. The agent leaned in, following her line of sight, a user identifier, not masked anymore, not hidden behind layers of routing, but present, visible, the name not yet fully resolved, but close enough to recognize structure, close enough to confirm identity was no longer abstract. "We have them," the agent said, not loudly, but with a finality that carried through the room. Ava did not respond right away. Her eyes remained on the identifier as it continued to resolve, letter by letter, the system pulling it into clarity. Not yet, she said finally, her tone unchanged. We have their position. The agent straightened slightly, recalibrating. And the difference? He asked. Ava's gaze did not waver. Position can shift, she replied. Identity cannot. The words settled into the space between them, precise, grounded. The screen updated again, the identifier stabilizing, no longer fluctuating, no longer partial. The name locking into place with quiet certainty. Ava exhaled slowly, not in relief, but in completion of a step. Now we have them, she said. And for the first time since the pattern had emerged, the movement on the screen slowed. Not because the system forced it, but because the person on the other side had just realized something they could no longer undo. And in that moment, the room did not feel tense. It felt aligned, like everything had moved exactly where it needed to be. The name did not arrive with a sound. It appeared, clean and final on the screen, letters locking into place with a certainty that felt heavier than any alarm. Ava did not move when it stabilized. Her eyes held it, not as a surprise, but as confirmation of something that had been forming long before this moment. The agent beside her leaned in slightly, reading it once, then again, as if expecting it to shift, to correct itself into something less direct, but it did not. It remained steady, undeniable, internal, he said quietly, the word carrying more weight than volume. Ava nodded once, her gaze still fixed on the identifier. Not just internal, she replied, embedded. The distinction settled immediately, changing the scale of what they were looking at. This was not someone passing through the system. This was someone who belonged inside it, someone who knew its rhythms, its blind spots, its assumptions. The room seemed to narrow again, not physically, but in focus, the outside world falling further away as everything centered on the screen. Pull personnel cross-reference, Ava said, her voice calm, precise. The agent moved without hesitation, typing quickly, the system responding with a new panel, data populating alongside the identifier, name, department, access level, history, all aligning in seconds, the information filling in like a portrait emerging from shadow. Ava scanned it once, her eyes moving smoothly, absorbing, connecting, mid-level access. The agent noted, but elevated permissions on financial routing. Ava's gaze shifted slightly, catching the detail before he finished the sentence. Granted, not earned, she said, the phrasing deliberate, the implication clear. The agent exhaled slowly, understanding settling in. Someone placed them there, he said. Ava did not respond verbally, but the stillness in her posture confirmed it. The system chimed again, a softer tone now, less urgent, more procedural, as if it had transitioned from detection to processing. The entries on the screen slowed further, not because the system was forcing it, but because the person on the other side had reached a limit. Their movement reduced, contained, their options narrowing without them fully seeing the edges yet. Ava leaned forward slightly, her hand resting near the keyboard again, not acting, just ready. They are hesitating, the agent said. Watching the reduced activity, Ava nodded once. Because they finally see the pattern, she replied, her voice even, just not the boundary. The distinction was subtle, but critical. The person on the other end understood something was wrong, but not where it ended, not how far it had already closed around them. The screen updated again, a new attempt, smaller, more cautious, a deviation from the previous direct path. Ava watched it unfold, her expression unchanged. They are testing exits, the agent said. Ava's eyes tracked the movement, following it without effort. And confirming none of them work, she replied. The agent straightened slightly, the clarity of it settling into place. So what now? He asked. Ava did not answer immediately, her gaze shifting briefly to the badge on the table, the metal surface catching a thin line of light, then back to the screen, the reflection fading as quickly as it appeared. Now we let them choose, she said finally, her voice low, controlled. The agent frowned slightly, not in disagreement, but in calculation. Choose what? He asked. Ava's eyes remained steady. Whether they stop moving, she replied, or show us everything. The words settled into the room, quiet but absolute. The system chimed again, a new entry appearing, slower than before, more deliberate, as if the person on the other side had shifted from instinct to thought. The pattern changed, not accelerating, not narrowing, but expanding slightly, branching into areas that had not been touched before. Ava saw it immediately, her posture tightening just a fraction. "There," she said softly. The agent leaned in again, following her focus. "They are reaching outward," he said. Ava nodded once. "Not to escape," she replied. "To protect." The distinction carried a different weight. The movement was no longer about survival alone. It was about something else, something connected, something at risk beyond the individual. The agent's expression sharpened. "Then there is more," he said. Ava's gaze did not waver. "There is always more," she replied. And in that moment, the quiet room held a new kind of tension, not from uncertainty, but from expansion, as the system revealed that what had begun as a single thread was connected to something wider, something deeper, and something that had just begun to surface. The shift was subtle at first, almost invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. The new branches spreading across the screen did not explode outward. They unfolded carefully, like someone opening doors one at a time in a house they knew too well. Ava's eyes tracked each movement without hesitation, her focus sharpening not from urgency, but from recognition. This was no longer a reaction. This was intention, controlled and deliberate. The agent beside her leaned in closer, his voice lower now. "They are not panicking," he said, and there was something different in his tone, not surprise, but respect. Ava nodded once, her gaze steady. "No," she replied. "They are preparing." The word settled heavier than anything before it. The system chimed again. Another access request, then another, each one touching a different segment, not random, not scattered, but connected, like pieces of a structure being secured before a collapse. Ava moved her hand slightly across the table, not touching the keyboard yet, just aligning herself with the rhythm of the screen. "They are locking down what matters to them," the agent said, following the pattern. Ava's eyes narrowed slightly. "And revealing what they think we will miss," she corrected. The distinction landed instantly, changing the perspective from defense to exposure. The person on the other side was not just protecting. They were choosing what to show, what to risk, and what to sacrifice. The room seemed to grow quieter, not from stillness, but from concentration. Every sound reduced to the soft hum of the system and the faint rhythm of updates appearing in real time. Ava leaned forward slightly now, her fingers resting on the edge of the keyboard, ready, but still waiting. "We can isolate each branch," the agent suggested, his hand hovering near the controls. Ava did not look at him, her eyes still on the screen. "If we isolate, we fragment," she said calmly. "And they keep control of the narrative." The agent paused, absorbing that, his posture shifting again, recalibrating. "So we let it expand," he said. Ava nodded once. "We let them define the structure," she replied. The entries continued to appear, but now they were different, more deliberate, each one touching a point that seemed unrelated at first, until the pattern revealed itself, a sequence forming not in lines, but in layers. Ava saw it, not immediately, but completely once it surfaced. "It is not random," she said softly, almost to herself. The agent leaned closer, following her gaze. "What is it?" he asked. Ava traced the connections with her eyes, each point linking to another, forming something larger than a simple trail. "It is a map," she said, the words quiet, but exact. The agent straightened slightly, his eyes widening just enough to show the realization. "A map of what?" he asked. Ava's gaze did not waver. "Of everything they were told to protect," she replied. The weight of it settled instantly. This was no longer just about one person inside the system. It was about a structure built around them, a network that extended beyond what had been visible. The screen updated again, a new branch connecting to the others, the shape becoming clearer, not chaotic, but organized, intentional. "They are showing us," the agent said. Slowly, Ava nodded once. "Because they know we are already here," she replied. The implication was unmistakable. The person on the other side had stopped trying to escape. They had shifted to something else, something closer to disclosure, but on their own terms. Why now? the agent asked. Ava finally looked away from the screen for a fraction of a second, her eyes moving to the badge resting on the table. The reflection faint but steady, then back again, because they realized who stopped. Them, she said, her voice calm, but carrying a deeper layer now, not emotion, but recognition. The system chimed again, a new entry appearing at the center of the forming structure, different from the others, not branching outward, but anchoring inward. Ava's posture shifted just slightly, the smallest indication of change since this began. That is new, the agent said. Ava's eyes locked onto it. No, she replied quietly. That is where it started. The room seemed to tighten again, the focus narrowing to that single point. Everything else now secondary, every branch, every connection leading back to it. Ava's hand moved at last, her fingers pressing a single key, expanding the node into full view. The data unfolded, deeper, denser, revealing layers that had not been visible before, and in that moment, the silence in the room was no longer calm. It was aware, as if everything had just crossed into something that could not be undone, and Ava Carter, standing still in that quiet space, understood that what they were looking at was not just evidence. It was a decision that had already been made on the other side, one that was now moving toward them with quiet, unstoppable clarity. The expanded node did not just reveal data. It revealed intent, layers of access, timestamps, and internal flags aligning into something that felt less like a system log and more like a record of choices made under pressure. Ava's eyes moved steadily across the screen, not rushing, not skipping, each line absorbed and placed into context with the others. The agent beside her remained silent now, no longer offering suggestions, no longer anticipating direction, because the structure unfolding in front of them demanded full attention, not interruption. This is not a breach, he said finally, his voice lower than before, almost careful. Ava did not look away from the screen. No, she replied. This is a handoff. The distinction landed with quiet force. The data continued to populate, revealing access points that had been opened deliberately, not forced, permissions granted in sequence, each one building toward the next, like a chain designed to be followed, not hidden. Ava leaned forward slightly, her fingers resting against the edge of the table, her posture unchanged, but her focus deeper now. They are not trying to erase, the agent said, understanding beginning to settle. Ava nodded once. They are documenting, she corrected, the word reframing everything. What had seemed like movement, like escape, was in fact something else entirely, a structured release of information, controlled, intentional, and timed. The system chimed again, another layer unfolding beneath the first, encrypted segments opening one by one, not because they had been broken, but because they had been unlocked from within. Ava's eyes tracked the sequence, her breathing even, her expression calm, but the stillness in her posture carried more weight now. This is coordinated, the agent added. Ava's gaze flicked briefly to him, then back to the screen. Not externally, she said. Internally, the implication settled deeper. This was not an outsider exposing a system. This was someone inside it choosing to reveal it. The screen updated again, a message field appearing at the center of the node, different from the surrounding data, not coded, not structured like the rest, but written, direct, the cursor blinking once before the text finalized. Ava did not move as it appeared. She read it once, then again, the words simple, but carrying more weight than any of the data around them. They left a statement, the agent said quietly. Ava nodded, her voice steady as she spoke. They wanted understood. The message was not long, but it was precise, outlining actions taken, decisions made, and the reason behind them. Not emotional, not defensive, just clear, the kind of clarity that comes from someone who has already accepted the consequences of what they are doing. Ava's eyes moved across the lines again, not searching for meaning, but confirming alignment. They knew this would happen, the agent said. Ava did not respond immediately, her gaze lingering on the final line of the message, then shifting back to the surrounding data. They ensured it would, she replied, the distinction subtle, but absolute. The room felt different now, not tense, not uncertain, but settled in a way that only comes when something hidden has fully surfaced. The system chimed again, softer this time, more procedural, the sequence slowing, not because it was interrupted, but because it was complete. Ava straightened slightly, her hand lifting from the table, her posture returning to its original stillness. The agent exhaled slowly, the weight of what they had just seen settling into place. "So what happens now?" he asked, not out of confusion, but acknowledgement of the shift. Ava looked at the screen one last time, the data no longer moving, the structure fully revealed. Then her gaze lifted, steady, composed. "Now it is no longer hidden," she said, her voice calm, grounded, "and that changes everything." The agent nodded slowly, understanding not just the immediate outcome, but the wider implications. The building outside the window remained unchanged, the city still moving, unaware, but inside that quiet room. The process had reached a point where it could not be reversed. Ava reached down and picked up her badge, the metal cool against her fingers, grounding, familiar. She held it for a moment, not as a symbol, not as a statement, but as part of the continuity that had brought her here. Then she turned slightly toward the door, her posture steady, her movement unhurried. Because the moment they had just witnessed was not the end of something. It was the beginning of what would follow, and she already knew that what came next would not be louder, not more dramatic, but far more permanent than anything that had come before. The hallway outside the conference room was quieter than before, not because anything had stopped, but because everything inside Ava had settled into place. She stepped out with the same measured pace, the badge held loosely in her hand, no longer raised, no longer needed to prove anything, just present. The door behind her closed softly, sealing in the data, the screens, the evidence that would now move through channels far beyond this floor. The agent remained inside, already on his device, his voice low, relaying what had just been confirmed. But Ava did not stay to listen. She did not need to hear the next steps spoken out loud. She already understood them. The process would continue, structured, controlled, inevitable. Her shoes moved quietly across the carpet, each step even, each movement grounded, as if the weight of what had just unfolded had not slowed her, but aligned her. The elevator doors opened as she approached, almost as if they had been waiting. She stepped inside without hesitation, turning slightly as the doors closed, her reflection appearing again in the mirrored surface, still, composed, unchanged, the same calm presence that had stood in the lobby earlier, the same steady gaze that had not wavered when she was dismissed, when she was underestimated, when she was ignored. The elevator began to descend this time, the motion smooth, controlled, the faint hum barely audible. Ava's eyes lowered slightly, not in thought, but in awareness, the sequence replaying not as emotion, but as clarity, each moment exactly where it needed to be, each decision placed without force, without noise, just precision. The doors opened again onto the lobby, and the space felt different now, not visibly altered, but quieter in a way that acknowledged what had passed through it. The receptionist looked up as Ava stepped out, her posture straightening slightly, not out of obligation, but recognition. The guard near the entrance shifted as well, his gaze following Ava with a subtle respect that had not been there before. Ava did not pause. She moved through the space with the same steady rhythm, the marble floor reflecting faint traces of light beneath her steps, the glass doors ahead already beginning to part, the outside air visible beyond them, bright, ordinary, unchanged. She stepped through, the city sound rising softly to meet her, distant traffic, a passing voice, the rhythm of a world that continued without interruption. The black vehicles that had been there earlier were gone now, the curb empty, the moment that had unfolded already moving beyond this place. Ava paused for a fraction of a second just outside the entrance, not to look back, not to reconsider, but to breathe, a single steady breath that matched the quiet inside her. Then she stepped forward, merging into the flow of the sidewalk, her figure blending with the movement around her, no one stopping, no one noticing, just another person walking through the city. And yet the difference was not in what could be seen, it was in what had been set into motion, far beyond this street, far beyond this moment. The network that had hidden itself was no longer hidden, the choices that had been made inside it were no longer contained, and the consequences would not arrive with noise or spectacle. They would arrive the way everything else had in this case, quietly, precisely, and without hesitation. Ava continued walking, her pace steady, her posture relaxed, the badge now resting at her side, catching a brief flash of sunlight. Before settling back into shadow, she did not look at it. She did not need to, because what it represented had already done its work. And as she moved forward into the ordinary rhythm of the day, there was nothing in her expression that suggested what had just happened. No trace of triumph, no need for acknowledgement, just a quiet, grounded certainty that did not ask to be seen, only to be carried forward. And somewhere far behind her, in systems and offices and conversations that would unfold over days and weeks and months, the impact of this moment would continue to expand, not loudly, not visibly, but with a permanence that no one in that lobby had fully understood, except the one person who had never needed to raise her voice to change everything.